attenzione, Achtung, attenzione, which is, of course, a mashup of German and Italian. Why? Well, the reason for this is that 80 years ago, in late April 1942, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini met in Salzburg to discuss war strategy. Mussolini, it's the same old black and white footage of those two. That's what, if we were doing this as a documentary, the same old Mussolini on a balcony like that to tell us who Mussolini is. Mussolini agreed to send more Italians.
Hitler doing this.
That's right, Hitler doing that. Exactly.
Lifting his hand.
And then
and looking very unhumorous. No smile.
Exactly. And then the Hurricanes 4 machine guns. Bah, 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 bah. With the fabric. Mussolini.
I basically vowed never to make a documentary again unless it's got the Hurricane fabric going. I'm going to have it written into the.
For those that don't know what we're talking about, there are certain items of what we've digressed already. And there are certain items of stock footage that always appear in all Second World War documents. The other thing I really love is the fact that all that footage is silent, and so it's always dubbed. And so you get this very peculiar thing of the same sounds. For whatever the tank is going by, it makes the same like rattling noise. No matter how heavy, fast or slow it's going, they go, oh, all right,
could be Matilda 1, could be a Tiger 2.
Exactly. There's no Get Me Matilda 1. Oh, hang on a minute, it's a Cromwell. They always use, tank MP3. We'll just tank WAV. We'll just stick that in. And then machine gun can be anything. So a Bren gun will be going like that rather than knock. Anyway, I digress.
And when you have scenes of Hitler and Mussolini, what you always have is you have a surging crowd sound.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
And of course, you have the Hurricane firing its machine gun.
Yeah, you fire the fabric. The 4 machine guns on the Hurricane wing, on the leading edge of the Hurricane wing. The 4 303s together with the what would be red fabric all torn around the going like that. Anyway, Mussolini at this meeting.
To get back to the point.
At this meeting, Mussolini agreed to send more Italians to the Eastern Front. Poor sods, probably not the best move. And both men agreed to a plan for the invasion of Malta, codenamed Operation Hercules. Fal Hercules, which of course did not happen. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al-Murray and James Holland. Jim, I mean, an invasion of Malta, would they have been able to pull that off?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the Germans were, because Hitler wasn't very interested in it, and it was Mussolini that was pressing for it.
Yeah.
And Kesselring, who was the senior German commander in the Mediterranean, they were both pressing for it, and Hitler was like, well, we did Crete last year, I didn't get great, did it? Let's face it, I know we won, but.
Yeah.
So he wasn't very keen on it. And so it was going to have to be an Italian show and an Italian-led operation, which basically meant it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Could it have happened? Could it have actually worked? Probably not, because they don't really have any landing craft.
Well, they had paratroopers. The Italians, I mean,
they had paratroopers.
Yeah,
but,
they were.
But there's a problem with paratroopers.
Yes, it doesn't work. Tends not to go very well.
They scatter all over the place. Malta's a pretty small island. You can see.
Oh no!
50% of the Italian went into the sea. That was lost.
In the confusion that night, 50% of the Italians were dropped in the sea. You could completely see that and drowned. And mistaking a destroyer for the landing light, he dropped it. An entire squadron were dropped. Off the coast. You can completely see all those kind of cock-ups.
And also, you have to remember that Malta, by 1942, is absolutely bristling with anti-aircraft guns.
Bristling is what you say about anti-aircraft guns, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
Bristling with anti-aircraft guns.
Was it? And the acrid stench of cordite.
The acrid stench of cordite. Bristling with anti-aircraft guns. The acrid stench of cordite hanging heavy on the morning.
Yeah. What? Okay. Well, let's in the back of our minds. Let's just think of other cliches we can come up with between now and the end of this podcast.
So I mean, an invasion.
The briny
of Malta,
grey Atlantic.
But had an invasion of Malta worked? Had they, because what you're talking about is Hitler's strategic sense and Italy's tactical capacity. Both of which militate against an invasion of Malta. But let's say...
let's just say that...
Let's say Hitler... Well, I mean, and this is the problem with what-ifs, is often they demand too much. I went to see that film, The Norseman, last weekend.
The Northman, yeah. Is it good?
The Northman, right?
Oh no, you did. You told me it. It's incredibly violent.
I absolutely loved it. It's incredibly violent. Absolutely loved it. Well, what's really interesting about it is it's the depiction of the Viking world is what it is. But but it has a plot, and the plot couldn't be any simpler. It's boy vows to avenge his father, who is murdered. He's called Hamlet.
And does.
He's called Hamlet. It's the plot of Hamlet. Every prophecy in it, or it's like a proto Hamlet. Every sort of much more violent Hamlet. He doesn't dither. Let's put it that way, like Hamlet does. It's every prophecy about what he's going to do comes true. Everything he's told is like so. The plot runs like clockwork, so that you can depict a world. And it really made me think in a strange way about what ifs, because what if Hitler decides to invade Malta and the Italians? It's just never going to happen. They are locked in. They are locked into their decision making and their ability in the way that the Amleth in the Northman can only deliver on his vow to avenge his father. That there's just that some of the Second World War, the plot is like clockwork. Given the protagonists, and obviously people will hate.
They can't deviate. Well, this is Phillips, Payson's, O'Brien's point, really.
Yeah, because you can't persuade Hitler that Malta's a good idea. That's never going to happen. And at the moment when it's not bristling with anti-aircraft guns with the heavy stench of cordite,
the acrid stench of cordite, is June 1940. Yeah. They don't do anything. I mean, they have this one window basically, which is June.
Their eyes on a much bigger prize, which is England, which is maybe invading.
Actually,
England.
No, it isn't really.
It's exactly
Mussolini. For Mussolini,
but then it's not. Yeah, exactly, because he's not. He doesn't think like that because he's destined to make strategic mistakes the entire time.
Well, because he's over. He's a dictator, so he's just going. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to conquer the Aegean. We're going to have the whole Mediterranean. We're going to have this empire that goes from Abyssinia all the way up through Sudan, Egypt, the Suez Canal, Libya. This is going to be our new Roman Empire, and it's going to be great. What about Malta? Yeah, we should do something about that. Okay, well, let's send over the bombers straight away. So declare war on the 10th, send bombers over on the 11th.
Yeah.
That handful, a bit wayward. They kill a few people on Fort St. Elmo, including a 16-year-old. Malta's very shocked. Britain suddenly goes, God, we didn't think we had the strength to defend Malta, but actually they haven't really pressed home their advantage. So tell you what, it doesn't matter that we're under threat. Let's just send over a whole load of anti-aircraft guns so that Malta can bristle and have the acrid stench of cordite wherever the Italians come over.
Yeah.
And by December they've got absolutely zillions. Yes, there's Faith, Hope and Charity, which are these kind of sort of handful of Gloucester Gladiator biplanes.
Yeah.
But the first Hurricanes are there within 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah. But
and it's too late.
But to go back, exactly. So to go back to my point, this sort of idea of that because a lot of the what ifs,
you can do a what if, but it's all preordained, so there's no point.
Yeah, and I know people will not like the idea that it's preordained. Because that tells you that you have no free will in a strange way, doesn't it? It tells you that yes. I got up this morning the way I was going to get up this morning, and I've got no choice. And people really don't. They find it pretty unpalatable, don't they? The idea there is that these things are preordained. But I think you can't do the Malta what if because it demands things that are completely out of character of the situations
and also, ultimately, they don't have the kit to do it.
Well, exactly.
They don't have landing craft. They don't have the
kit, but they don't have the kit to do it because, after all, the Italian fascist state is a paper tiger. He hasn't invested. No. He hasn't trained. It hasn't seeped all the way. And yes, they do have their elite divisions, but they've not got the capability for this kind of thing because they're new. Because after all, Italy is a brand new country that's new on the block as an imperial power. That's the other thing. Yeah. And it's trying to play catch up with Britain, who've been doing this sort of stuff for 200 years. Which is one of the reasons Italy has been a basket case for so long. Is because Britain has been doing this sort of stuff for 200 years.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think but ultimately, everything is, there could be a different outcome. The war can last 7 years or 3 years, or a battle might have taken 2 days, not 10, or something like that, or an extra battleship might have been sunk that wasn't.
Yeah.
But it's degrees. But ultimately, so much of it depends on the system.
Yeah.
The foundation blocks. Have you got enough oil? I mean, when you're in a situation where Romania in 1941 and throughout much of the war never produces more than 1.5 million tons of oil.
Yeah. That's it.
For Romania, and Germany's not getting 1.5 million tons. That is the total that Romania is producing out of its prestige oil field.
Yeah.
And Britain in 1941 is importing 10 million tons of oil alone.
Yeah.
Just into Britain, not elsewhere in the empire or dominions. Just in Britain, domestically, it is importing 10 million tons. That tells you something. That tells you that the odds are stacked against the country that's only got access to potentially a portion of 1.5 million tons of oil.
Yeah,
and you can't do anything about that.
Yeah. Well, exactly. But I just sort of think what you've got to remember about what ifs is that they're like the plot of the Northman. He's only going, and he's only going to avenge his father. He has no choice,
Yeah.
And this isn't to get sucked into that Man of Destiny stuff, because I think I'm still thinking about talking to Andrew Roberts the other week, and and I read a large chunk of his book, and that Man of Destiny idea. Winston Churchill saying, "I'm a man of destiny." Charles de Gaulle did the same thing, said, "I'm going to save France when my moment comes." But how many blokes in the late 19th century, posh blokes, connected imperial posh blokes, are saying to their mates, "I'm a chap of destiny. I'm going to do great things." I'd say
I have to go to the Khyber Pass.
Exactly, I'd say it's half of them, isn't it? This is the problem with the Churchill as Man of Destiny sort of deck of cards, isn't it? It's because that's the sort of bollocks people spouted around, at the time. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I completely agree with that. And
there's no way of going through everyone's conversations and letters at the time to contextualize him in that sense, is there? But it just strikes me that the era he's puked out by, mid to late 19th century Victorian England, you can't move for people who think they're men of destiny. You just look at, he goes on, he's an Omdurman, isn't he? Which is packed with men who think they have a destiny mission, to reform the empire and
Lord Wingate. I think he thought he was a man of destiny.
Well, there we are. I mean, to bring it back to
I rest my case.
One of my favourite subjects. Yeah, absolutely, exactly. But I just think this is why you sort of got to be careful, because yes, everyone's a man of destiny in this sense. But destiny doesn't care about you. Destiny grinds on. Destiny doesn't allow Hitler his what ifs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, absolutely.
So I recommend the Northman, although parental guidance advised. It's extremely bloody. Now we'll do some parish notices, and then I want to talk a little bit about we've got stuff to talk about, because you've been to see the Germans.
And I want to talk to you about Vancitart.
Anyway, parish notices. A few quick notices. We have now confirmed all speakers and most of our hardware for this year's We Have Ways Fest. The second inaugural We Have Ways Festival. Max Hastings is coming to talk about Churchill.
Yeah, that's going to be good.
Jim, that is absolutely fantastic. That whichever string you have been able to pull, that we have Max Hastings coming.
Well, as I've said to you before, he's a very, very nice fellow, and he's fantastic to talk to and fantastic to listen to, because even if you don't 100% agree with his take on the Second World War, this is a guy who's kind of spoken to a lot of. I mean, he interviewed Arthur Harris.
Yeah.
He was a journalist on the Falklands. He's been around the block. He's Premier League. He's edited newspapers. What he says is still worth listening to. Absolutely, with bells on. Yeah. And he's a great writer as well. So that'll be terrific.
Yeah. And so Max Hastings, Catherine Himmler is coming to discuss the challenges of having that family name. We've got all of your favourites and regulars. Peter Caddick Adams is joining us. Katja Hoyer, Alex Ritchie, Saul David, who was on the live cast the other day with me. Waitman Bjorn is joining us. And of course, the Colonel will be coming to talk about the bridges at Pegasus Bridge, the bridging sappers at Pegasus Bridge. I hope he's wearing his beret for that. Also, we have Joe Coles from Hush Kit, Dan Todman, Andy Chatterton with Stay Behinds, Rob Lyman, plus Jonathan Fennell, Rana Mitter, Mark Milner, and Gajendra Singh. I mean, this is, just in terms of if you want to pick people's brains about the Second World War.
And John McManus. I mean, John McManus is coming over, got Mark Milner coming over from Canada, got John McManus coming over from the US. I mean, these are heavyweight, top draw Premier League historians serious players. And,
plus, we also have a Bergen-Belsen survivor, Maurice Bilk, is coming to talk to us.
Maurice Blick.
Sorry. So too is the legendary Des Curtis.
Oh, Des Curtis is just amazing. Yeah. He's absolutely amazing. He is a navigator on a Mosquito, training with 618 Squadron. We had him on a few weeks ago. We did double bill with him.
Yeah,
he's so kind of measured in his. He's obviously had time to sort of think about his experiences and sort of analyze them and contextualize them. So he's very interesting.
He's obviously had time, but he's taken the time, hasn't he? Which hasn't just sort of consigned it to the memory hole. He's
and had this remarkable relationship, made this friendship with the captain of the U-boat that he sunk.
My goodness.
After the war, many years after the war. It's just incredible story. He's great.
Incredible. Yeah. Paul Beaver will be there. Christoph Bergs, Stephen Fisher, who's been doing some amazing stuff on Twitter, going through D-Day photos, and there's absolutely incredible. What's going on here? Who are these tanks? What's happening? And Will Iredale, and we have Bernard Cast, Ian McGregor, whose book about Stalingrad. Have you been reading?
I've read it. It's brilliant. It's really, really good.
It's amazing, isn't it? And really intimate, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I just thought it was I thought he's very, very clever. He's got all these kind of personal testimonies that no one's sort of really seen before.
Yeah.
That sort of laid in a sort of dusty cellar since the 1950s.
Yeah.
But he uses them to sort of piece a much more that sort of cut through the myth about Stalingrad, because there is a whole sort of Pavlov's house stuff. There is a whole load of sort of myth going on around that. But his battle sequences and what actually going and what it's like being in Stalingrad at that time, they really a very, very vivid picture and incredibly readable. So it felt like it's got all the kind of sort of he's rolled up his sleeves and done the hard yards on the research.
Yeah.
But he hasn't lost sight of his story. So for the layman, it's not dense and difficult and full of awkward names and unit numbers. It's actually which can happen very easily. It's actually a pretty fast-paced, compelling read, I would say. Yeah. So I think he's nailed it.
It's really, really good. So Ian will be there. Jens Weiner and Bastian Willems. In fact, Ian told me he's got some pictures he's going to show that no one's seen. That he'll be showing at the festival. So Jens and Bastian, we spoke to Bastian not so long ago, didn't we?
Yes, we did, about Königsberg. Jens I caught up with in Germany this week. And
we're going to get to that.
I had an hour with him.
Yeah. We've got John Tregonning as well, Sean Scullion, plus Akak Andy Aitchison. Can anyone guess what Andy will be talking about?
Or indeed what chats we'll be talking about.
What chats we'll be talking about. It's an incredible list. What's very exciting about this is that we have people from the absolute A-list of Second World War history, and also people from the grassroots coming through. I'm very excited that Andy can talk because, it's because of this podcast he's become obsessed with. Which division is it again? 52nd Lowland Division. we do know, Andy. Don't worry, we do know now. Yeah. And it's because of this podcast and because of that we've asked him to come and speak. So, I mean, that is very, very exciting.
And we got Phillips Payson O'Brien coming.
And
we've also got David Willey. David Willey, creator of the Tank Museum at Bovington. He's coming up.
Yeah. I mean, the thing, Phil has, since we spoke to Phillips, probably 18 months ago.
He's a megastar now.
He's a megastar because
he's got 4 billion followers on Twitter now.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? But it's because his analysis of the power and importance and centrality of logistics to warfare just because it was relevant then doesn't mean it ain't relevant now. I mean, it's very, very interesting. So
the other thing I'm really, really excited about though is I think it's something that we're going to do, which is I've never seen before, and I think it's going to be very special. So what we're doing is we're doing a little sort of all arms demonstration. And what we're not trying to do is we're not trying to recreate any combat. What we're trying to do is recreate training procedures.
Yeah.
Because I think trying to recreate combat is just silly and ridiculous, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, impossible. Yeah.
It's impossible, and you know, but seeing people wearing the right things with the right equipment, doing the right drills, I think is very, very. I think it's very thrilling to see, actually. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this battery of 25-pounders moving up and moving into position, and then a troop of Sherman tanks and a platoon of infantry are then going to move through.
Yeah.
To see those three parts of the British Army from 1944 in operation together, doing everything correctly, is going to be very, very special. To see 3 or 4 Shermans together with infantry, that is going to look absolutely superb.
Yeah,
it really will. And then there will be a few bangs.
So that's the garrison. That's Tobin Jones and Monty's men in a We Have Ways universe crossover event, the like of which no one has ever seen before. And the festival now has its own dedicated website, so please do check it out. wehavewaysfest.co.uk. That's up. wehavewaysfest.co.uk. Right. Where have you been this week, though, Jim? Actually, how long have we been going? No, let's talk for a bit more. Where have you been this week, then, Jim?
Well, I've been in Dresden, which has been fascinating. I was very thrilled to get asked by Jan Kindler, who is the kind of sort of immense man at the Militärhistorische Museum in Dresden, and this is the National Army Military History Museum. So it is run by the Bundeswehr, and so the director of the museum is an army colonel.
Right. That's interesting.
And all the security there is all army, so everyone has to lock their offices all the time, and every door you need fobs and yet more keys, and you have to then hand in your key at the end of the day, and all this kind of stuff. It's all quite, as you'd expect, but it's quite good. But it is the most stunning building. So they had this in the 18th century, I think, or maybe it's the first part of the 19th century. It was in Saxony in those days, and it was a huge military barracks, and then a Second Reich barracks. And this whole part north of the centre of Dresden is, I mean, they could house 20 to 30,000 troops there.
Blimey! So
it's huge, and there's just these massive barrack blocks. I've got to say they're slightly more attractive barrack blocks than the ones that we built in the UK. And one of these big buildings has been converted into the museum. It's also got this sort of modern architecture kind of feature in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But it completely works. I mean, it is an absolutely stunning museum.
Right.
And it's very interesting about how they portray, obviously, the First World War and the Second World War particularly.
Yeah.
And how do you do it? And it's really interesting because they haven't come over all kind of they're not all sort of just endlessly going on about victims and how awful it was and all the rest of it. They're quite, obviously they address all that, but they're quite sort of just, this is what they wore, this is what they did. It's all quite matter of fact.
Yeah.
And they've got some stunning displays. So they've got this sort of exploding mortar shell.
Yes.
Which with all the bits hanging on sort of, gossamer threads of nylon. And you just see it all just sort of going, and it's incredibly arresting, as you can imagine. And then there's a sequence on sort of medicals, medication and medical work in the Second World War. And so they've got sort of uniforms and, shelves of sort of beautifully presented and with lots of space of pills and equipment and bandages and all the rest of it. And then at the bottom of this huge case, you suddenly go, hang on a minute, what is that? And you look down and you realise it's a foot.
What?
Yes. And it's an amputated foot from a soldier at Stalingrad who had chronic frostbite.
Right.
And there it is. And it's obviously absolutely horrible. But weirdly sort of...
What an interesting thing to do.
Yeah. So it's not sparing at all. but it's also just very matter of fact. And they've got lots of stuff on kind of Nazi social media, posters, films, and the like, and all that kind of stuff. It is just so well done. I can't tell you. It's really, really stunning, and just a stunning building where there's lots of space for it all to breathe. Anyway, I was doing this talk with Jens Wehner, obviously friend of the show.
Yeah.
And Jens, when he first came on to talk to us, was talking about Stalingrad, if you remember.
Yes.
But he's completed his PhD, and it's now been published in book form. And it's about the fighter arm of the Luftwaffe.
Right.
And he's very interesting about this. And, I don't want to do sort of spoiler alert, but he's got a lot of fresh and interesting new things to say about the Luftwaffe. And his big point, and I guess I'm going to say this now because I've started, but his big point is that actually the bombers were the primacy, not the fighters.
Well, okay. Well, that's the other way up from.
Because he says the whole German way of war is to be on the front foot and to attack, and the Schwerpunkt and all the rest of it. And he says the bomber arm gives you that. The fighters are there to kind of protect them and escort them, but it's all about the bombers. And in the 1930s, that's what it's all about. And Wefer is absolutely Walter Wefer, who was the first chief of staff, is all for kind of heavy bomber force. But then he dies, and they don't have the wherewithal to do a heavy bomber force. So that's where dive bombing comes in. So that's why they kind of get so hung up on dive bombing.
It's a way of doing it with single engine aircraft for a start, isn't it?
And also with double engine aircraft, Junkers 88s.
Eventually,
yeah. But and I was reminded of a conversation with that I had before, and just after Hamburg in early August 1943, Goering calls together all his his senior commanders and says, right, that's it, we've got to retrench, we've got to kind of sort out our defense of the Reich, it's all about fighters now. And suddenly the phone rings, and it's it's the Fuhrer on the phone, and Hitler says to him, you can forget all this fighter talk, what we've got to do is organise a bomber force and go and bomb England. That's how you respond to this,
right?
And Goering sort of goes, okay, that's what you say, mein Führer.
All right, boss.
Yeah, all right, boss.
You say.
Jawohl.
Yeah.
And obviously it's bonkers, it doesn't really happen, but that's the plan. And of course that's because psychologically that's what the Luftwaffe does, it bombs.
Yeah.
And if you think about Poland, you think about Rotterdam, you think about everything, it's all about bombers. And and I so because my reaction when he told me this was exactly the same as yours, like, what? What about Hans-Joachim Marseille and Bibi Hartmann and all these aces that everyone sort of lords all the time, and all the Knights Crosses and stuff.
Yeah.
And he's saying, yeah, absolutely. They're pin-ups, but
the thrust of the arm is
the thrust of the arm. It's all about being aggressive, and being aggressive is all about bombing.
So why? So is it that the PR are we? I mean, here we are again in a tangle about what maybe happened or didn't because of successful, basically, blitzkrieg propaganda. The Nazi propaganda is so powerful and so successful that here we are 80 years later trying to unpick actually what the Luftwaffe's priorities were, because Galland people like Galland did such a beguiling job post-war, during the war and post-war, in presenting the Luftwaffe as these knights of the air.
And we've all fallen for it.
We've got hung up on aces, and we've all fallen for it.
Yes, but also, what are we doing in 1940? We're defending England. What are we defending with?
Well, fighters.
Right. So part of our natural myth is fighters against. And if you want to best the Luftwaffe, how do you best the Luftwaffe? Yeah, it's quite boring shit down at high school.
Spitfires.
Against
109s. There we go.
Yes, exactly. So it's all about. So suddenly it is the Knights of the Sky, isn't it? It's Tom Neal against Adolf Galland.
But then you have the Hurricane,
Stanford Tuck,
Team Hurricane saying, well, actually, when you look at this,
but even so, but they're still fighters against the 109s, aren't they?
Well, actually, I think you'll find the Hurricane shot down more bombers, James.
And at this point in the documentary,
it was the reliable workhorse, the Hurricane, which had an appetite for punishment the Spitfire could not match.
I think we got a documentary making.
with the acrid smell of.
But my point is that we should take a break in a minute. But my point is that actually you and I have been conditioned into thinking it's all about fighters.
Yeah.
And actually, the more I promise you, sit on Jens Weiner's thought, and you'll be cogitating this for a couple of days.
Yeah.
And it starts to grow, and the more you think about it, the more you realise he's right.
Well, I the thing is, interwar, all the interwar doctrinal talk is bomber will get through, is bomber offensive.
Absolutely. And this is his big point.
Why would the Germans be any different? Because that's the way everyone was thinking, and it was the cutting edge of military thinking. And bombing and they tried it in the First World War. They done what they could.
And what happens when the Me-262 comes in?
Well, they want to turn it into a dive bomber.
Or just a bomber.
Supposedly. Or a bomber.
Yeah, a bomber. It's not allowed to be a fighter. It's got to be a bomber. Why? Because that's the offensive arm.
Yeah. Well, and what do they spend all their money on? They spend their money on rockets and cruise missiles because they want to bomb.
They want to bomb.
They want to bomb.
It's absolutely,
I mean, actually, there you go. That completely explains. Oh, the great mystery of the V weapons? No. It's
because fighters are offensively defensive aircraft primarily.
Yeah.
In the eyes of the Luftwaffe.
Yeah.
They're there to defend the bombers. They're there to defend the Reich.
And cut and create air superiority so bombers can do what they want.
Yeah. Yes.
Because you're serving the bomber.
Exactly. You're serving the bomber. Anyway.
Well, that's interesting. Well, we're going to take a brief break and we'll come back. And then there's so much more to talk about. There always is. We'll see you in a tick. Welcome back to We Have Ways to Make You Talk with me, I'm Murray and James Holland. Now, James, before we get into it, because we had Chris Moran on the live cast last Monday talking about intelligence, and really talking an awful lot about Churchill's relationship to intelligence, and so he recommended a book called Behind the Black Door, which is about prime ministers.
Which I've now got on order.
Prime ministers and intelligence, and I've been sort of chewing through the relevant chapters of that, but we'll get to that in a minute, or maybe we won't, because I want to. One of the things when you're interested, you remarked to me, the hearing German points of view is really, really fascinating, but the reciprocal of that was the other thing. You said that the German people were saying to you, hearing your point of view as a British perspective was really interesting for them too. So what was it about your perspective, Jim? I'm not saying
my enlightened view.
Well, I'm not finding it incredible. Let's just put it that way. I'm not going, I can't believe it. They were, what was it? What was it they thought you were bringing to the party, do you think?
Well, so it's very interesting. So I was over there to do this talk with Jens Weiner about the Luftwaffe, and particularly about the Luftwaffe fighter arm. And we did it in this kind of sort of vaulted bit on the ground floor. It was just fantastic. I can't even begin to tell you how much I enjoyed it. It was incredibly, it was a packed hall, and lots of people there, which in a way was quite interesting. And they advertised by putting bill posters all over the place.
Demographic? So what was the demographic?
It was really mixed. I mean, 10% women, say.
Yeah.
But all ages, bloke-wise.
Right. Okay.
And a cross section, I would say. It was pretty broad. But all around Dresden, and the kind of sort of underneath the railway bridge, there's a poster for this event. It's really so that in itself is just sort of culturally different. But anyway, we got there, and Christiana did, who's overall in charge of the kind of museumy bit, maybe the chief curator or something. Yeah. She stood up and did an introductory talk, and she said, really pleased to be Jens Weiner is here and to talk about his amazing work, and we're really pleased that James has come. And it's very interesting for us having James, because obviously he can say things that we can't, and he has perspectives that we can't because he's British. And I was like, really? And then she was sort of talking about, and obviously, we have to be very sensitive in the way we talk about the War of Annihilation and all this sort of stuff. And I was okay, just this is so far removed from kind of sort of, Troops of Sherman Tanks and Monty. And,
yes.
and so that made me think. And then anyway, I was sort of, I was talking to Jan Kindler and talking to Jens and a little bit to Christiana about all this. And they're just perspectives. And they were saying that, one of the problems they have is they said, we can't really have anyone in Germany like you because you've either got to be really, really seriously academic.
Yeah.
Because everything you say gets poured over and picked over because you're German and you're talking about it. And you can't be seen to be in any way implying that you're simpatico and encouraging the ultra right, and so it's a real tightrope to walk. Or it tends to be kind of books, lots of illustrated books about panthers and Schwimmwagens. And she said, there's not much
refuge in the tech.
Yes, so there's a sort of big gulf, and there's not much in between. And so what there isn't is someone who's doing sort of popular narrative history and going on telly and doing podcasts and stuff. It just doesn't really exist over here. So, I mean, obviously, Bernard Cast and Christoph and people are doing their YouTube sites.
Yeah.
But they're not really having a sort of accompanying books that go with it.
No. I mean, obviously it would be different, but it's interesting to hear how and sort of where the land lies. I mean,
I don't know.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because after all, I think a lot of people would say, "Oh, when are the British going to stop going on about the war?" And we've talked about this with Katya, actually, with Katya Hoyer. I've talked to Katya about this, and she sort of says, "Well, when are the Germans going to start talking about the war?" I mean, I'm putting words into her mouth there, but that's kind of the sort of attitude I feel. That she's saying that at some point, that's how it feels talking to her about it. Is that the British won't stop going on about it, but maybe the Germans have got to find a way of talking about it beyond actually the Holocaust was a thing that happened, and you. And actually, where is German agency and German national agency and all that, or German population's agency and all that, rather than it's naughty Nazis making us do it sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that there's all those currents flowing, and then the military history, which after all, the actual fighting bit, which has gone through all sorts of historiographical convulsions, hasn't it? Here, and I'm sure in Germany and elsewhere. I mean, I just think it's so interesting. It's so interesting the idea. You arrive and they go, thank goodness we can talk about this in a way we wouldn't be allowed to.
Yeah, and so there was a talk, and that was great. Then they got me to do loads and loads of little videos.
Right.
They're starting up a YouTube channel, and they want little videos about some of the artifacts. So we went off to see a comet that they've got, left over. I talked about a universal carrier. I did a conversation with Jens about the Battle of Britain. Did another conversation with Jens about the Panzer IV that they've got in their vault, which was destroyed by a 17-pounder.
Yeah.
And so we did these little videos, and they were just all over it. I mean, they were just so happy. I did one about German uniforms, and they were just like, it's great. You can talk with kind of enthusiasm and passion. We just can't do that. It's just it was just very strange. And then they were talking about Liberation Day. And I was like, what are you talking about? And of course, Liberation Day is 8th. Well, in East Germany, it was all since 1950. It was the 9th of May. And so in Dresden, it still is. In other parts of Germany, it's the 8th of May. So in Berlin in 2020, they had a special public holiday. And it's Liberation Day, liberation from the evils of Nazism.
God, that's fascinating, isn't it?
Isn't it? It really, really is. And
especially as there's now a load of literature about the end of the war coming out of Germany, that sort of trying to get to grips with what was actually going on, and the sort of blind eyes that needed to be turned, or that people felt they had to turn, and the elisions that were made, and the fact the civil service carried on.
Yes, and they were also
and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were also quite interested about veterans. We were talking about veterans and stuff, and I was saying, well, I'd interviewed a number of veterans. They all seemed really, very nice blokes, and quite a few of them quite regretful, and they're like, I would say that, wouldn't they? You know?
Right.
And then I sort of told that story about that chap who kept breaking down in tears on me.
Yeah.
And he'd never told anyone else. And I was saying, I felt really sorry for him that he'd had this terrible burden. He said, well, they were really had very little sympathy.
What, like whatever? They were like that, were they?
Well, they weren't quite whatever. They were all they were cynical, and they were a bit kind of, well, every German who survived the war, they've got to reconcile what they did.
Right.
So they were on the wrong side. I said, but you can't say that they were all in it. I said, I mean, it's not.
But that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's that almost takes you back to well, you started it, doesn't it? It almost takes you back to that. Well, that British attitude of, well, they started it. You know what I mean, Jim?
Well, is it?
Which is really, really interesting because you can't be glib. You shouldn't be glib in that way about the Second World War. But
we're now finding ourselves in a situation where we have to be very careful about what we say because we might offend somebody or whatever. They've had this for kind of 80 years of being careful. And I wonder, what I was thinking about it afterwards, and what I wasn't sure was whether they genuinely felt that, or whether that is the public, because if you look, if there's even a whiff of you having sympathy for someone who was fighting for the Nazi regime,
that's ruinous.
Ruinous.
But then arguably fair enough. I mean, it's
but I can have that as a Brit. I can go, well, I felt really sorry for that guy, and I felt, he'd done his bit. They can't say that.
But do you think, Jim, in a way, with what's happening in Ukraine, that these questions are inevitably going to sort of surface again?
I suspect so. Yeah.
I
suspect so. They're very, very twitchy about Ukraine over there as well.
I'm not
particularly
surprised.
in Dresden, as you can imagine. It's not a million miles away.
Yeah. Anyway,
because I said, look, it'll be fine. Putin's overused his stuff and all the rest of it, and he's probably used up half his ammunition now, and it's all right. He won't get the parts, and their battalion battle groups are kind of all absolutely screwed, and they just haven't got the manpower. And Jens just looked at me and said, "That is a very Western view."
Wow.
And maybe it is. Well, I said, yeah.
Maybe it is. Maybe there's some. There's all with any situation like this. There's always a hearty dose of wishful thinking, isn't there? Is the truth? Want it to
usually is with me, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, now, so we, like I said, we had Chris Moran on Monday.
Yeah. So Vancitart.
Well, it's not just Vancitart. It's the story of. I mean, Chamberlain's relationship with intelligence is absolutely amazing.
Wow.
Because he doesn't believe in it.
Does he not?
Nope. And Chamberlain is running his own little network of people bugging. So he's bugging anti-appeasers.
Yeah.
So there's the sort of old, there's the old guard and around Churchill, and then there's the people around Eden, and they meet occasionally. With Churchill not present. This is sort of 1938, and Chamberlain's having them bugged. So what Chamberlain's really interested in, intelligence-wise, is how he can destabilise his political opponents, rather than find out what on earth's going on in Italy, for instance.
Gosh, that's very Goering-esque.
Well, so there's what's his name, Ball. Who's Joseph Ball, who's an MI5 officer, who's director of the Conservative Research Party in the 30s when Chamberlain was chairman. And Ball, secretly, as a weekly journal, right, which is trying to control the Conservative Party and trying to keep Chamberlain's enemies under control, right? And he's a Secret Service guy. He's an MI5 officer, right? So he knows how to bug people, how to pull strings, and how to manipulate people. And they use him. Chamberlain uses him to run an overseas foreign policy behind Eden's back. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. Right. So Eden is like, he's looking to the US for support in dealing with Mussolini. And what Ball's doing is running a counter a counter foreign policy with Chamberlain's blessing against Eden's foreign policy. So so Chamberlain and Ball concoct a letter, right, that purports to be from the Italians, addressed to Eden, offering talks, and they give it to Grandi.
Yeah,
Dino Grandi, right, the Italian ambassador in London, and Grandi comes forward and goes, we've invited, and it's a letter, and it's not from Grandi, it's Chamberlain inviting Eden to stitch Eden up. And there's
That's amazing, isn't it?
There's a meeting on the 18th of February 1938 where Grandi finally meets Chamberlain and Eden, and Grandi says he really enjoyed the open disagreement. I'm quoting from this book, The Black Door. He really recalling the two enemies confronting each other like two cocks in fighting posture.
How extraordinary.
Yeah. So because Chamberlain wants to control the foreign policy personally, he deliberately disrupts Eden by concocting an invitation. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And then, of course, 2 days later, Eden goes, well, sod this, and resigns, and is replaced by Halifax. And Chamberlain is running this entire thing. And then, obviously,
so intelligence for Chamberlain is all about stitching your
it's about
colleagues.
Power. It's about his power and not being challenged as prime minister. And
God, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And you look at, and Eden in the end is like, oh, sod this, so because
you can blame him.
And after all, Eden's it's really interesting because Eden's resignation in 1938 is presented as him stepping away from appeasement, him having had enough of it. But there's more to it than that. It's the fact he's being buggered about by the prime minister, who then obviously then goes to Italy and everything doesn't work out for him and he's made a fool of by Mussolini. And of course Mussolini knows he can make a fool of him because he knows how vulnerable Chamberlain is to manipulation. Yeah. Because it's
fascinating.
It's fascinating. And then Vancitart.
So presumably that your view of Chamberlain is sort of changed a bit.
Well, I just sort of think, well, Chamberlain is, is blinkers on to succeed, and anyone who gets in his way, he thinks he can handle all of these situations. So I even though, despite all this, I still think Chamberlain's trying to avoid a Second World War,
right?
Isn't he? So fair enough. And I sort of think,
and is he worried that the kind of the non-appeasers are just warmongers?
Well, yes, exactly, because Vancitart, this is where where Van comes in, who is obsessively anti-German, right? And Cadogan, who replaces
but he's
him,
absolutely right about the Nazis, though.
Oh, he's absolutely right, but he's completely one-track mind, and he'll tell anyone he can get his hands on that that Hitler's are wrong and he's going to cause a Second World War, right? And you can't trust him and all that sort of thing. But clearly to the point where he's a broken record and people are like,
yeah, wind your neck in, son.
Wind your neck in. And after all, that kind of obsession could be, it's the idea that he might provoke a situation by being that sort of fixed on his idea, right? And after all, Vancitart's brought back in early 1939 when things are obviously going wrong, and tries to create, and is really pushing for a Russian alliance, Soviet alliance, is really pushing for involving Poland, Hungary, and you could argue that by involving Poland brings Britain into the Second World War. So if you're looking at it like that, but it's just absolutely amazing what then goes on. And Christopher mentioned this on last week when he says that Chamberlain has to call a meeting where he has what the Secret Service's roles are explained to him because he doesn't know. People don't know.
Just amazing.
Yeah. And at the same time, MI6 they're completely blown. So you've got this you've got Dalton, the MI6 head of operations, who's in Germany, who's running passports. So passports becomes the really big thing, obviously, in Germany in the late 1930s. A really, really big thing. It's people trying to get to Palestine. So Major Dalton, who's running the MI6 station in Germany, he starts taking bribes, right, for passports. then he's blackmailed by one of the clerks, right? And commits suicide. So yeah, exactly. So the MI6 station in Germany is completely disrupted, but by the fact there's no policy for what you do about Jews trying to flee. So what he's doing is taking bribes. He's then subject to blackmail, right? And the blackmailer is sacked, right? And then sells his services to the German Secret Service because he obviously has bills to pay, and becomes a massive human source for the German, which allowed the Germans to discover who the human source on the German Navy is. So the whole thing's blown wide open, right? Then Dalton's MI6 replacement in The Hague hires this bloke who's the blackmailer.
Wow.
And brings him back into the onto the payroll with another German agent, which is why after all. So then the Hague station is flooded with German deception material and disinformation, and that's how you end up with the Venlo incident happening.
Right at the beginning of
because it's all been busted wide open, and I think it's really, really interesting because after all, and talking to Chris the other day, we do like to tell ourselves a story. The thing we were really good at in the Second World War is espionage, but we are really bad at it before the Second World War,
isn't it? But what a transformation! I mean, that's just amazing.
Well, yeah. Well, and interestingly, the point this book makes is it's the fact is Churchill comes in, and it's because Churchill's into it. He digs, skullduggery, and he digs intelligence, and he likes
another
spies
tick in his
and all
box.
that. Exactly. It's his bag, so he's into it.
I can't wait to get stuck into this, but it sounds great.
Well, and what's good about it is it's PM by PM, and then you've got Vancitart's running his own agency, basically.
Yes, but so this is this guy Mark Dineley. So Mark Dineley,
and Malcolm Christie in Washington, who's the air attaché in Washington in the 1920s, and they build their own net. And because
they're known as Vancitart's boys, aren't they?
Yeah. But Christie ends up close to Strasser, Court Strasser, and so Nazi dissidents, and has an agent X in the German Air Ministry, agent Y in the Catholic Church, and an agent Fish who's close to Hitler. These are all people we don't know who they are, right?
Any speculation?
Yeah. Well,
who do they think Agent Fish is?
Well, maybe is it Rudolf Hess? Maybe, because after all, there's a prominent defection later on, isn't there? But you've also got Vancitart saying, Vancitart going, well, and you get these reports back where people have been talking to Hess, and Hess is going, well, we're going to kill all the Jews in Europe, and they're going, that's just crazy. Cadogan saying there was certainly enough in the secret reports to make one's hair stand on end, but I never quite swallow all these things, and I'm presented with a selection. So basically, they're selecting out the bad news because they don't want to find themselves in a situation where they're going, amazing. Actually, there is a war coming. And, Vancitart's proved right by the Czechoslovakia crisis, which is why he's brought back in.
Yeah.
In early 1939. You've got this, you've got Court who's the charge d'affaires, who's part of Theodor Court, who's the charge d'affaires in the German embassy, who's one of Vancitart's men, who comes to Downing Street, turns up at Downing Street and talks to Horace Wilson, who's head of the civil service, and tells him to warn him that whatever agreements are made on paper, they're going to invade.
Worth nothing.
They're worth nothing. They're going to invade, and the message gets to Chamberlain, and Chamberlain's like, well, I'm not, sounds to me like bollocks. And after all, is relying on Henderson because
Neville Henderson.
Yeah, Neville Henderson, who's
the ambassador out there.
Who's the ambassador, who's a pal of Goering's, who's good with dictators. So he's good at handling dictators.
Imagine having that as your one-line pitch.
As your rep. Yeah. But this is what's really and then of course
here's Neville. He's great with dictators.
And then Halifax breaks with Chamberlain over this after Czechoslovakia goes, actually, you know what? We were wrong. We've got this wrong. And Chamberlain has a great big falling out with Halifax because of it.
Yeah, he doesn't like people telling him what to do, does he? He doesn't like being. He's one thing about Chamberlain is he's a very sort of proud man, isn't he? And he's very stubborn.
Well, and You know, I mean, the other thing to remember, of course, about appeasement is it's not just about avoiding war with Germany. It's about avoiding kind of war full stop, because you can't, you know, if you commit to one, you lose the back end of the empire. That your imperial commitments mean you can't go to war, because the empire will immediately probably collapse in on itself, and no one wants to risk that. I mean, it's just all that stuff about, you know, all the stuff about the, you know, that Chris told us about. There's the document with Chamberlain being referred to as an arsehole, an arschloch, and it's all underlined and handed to Chamberlain. Look, this is what they think of you. This is what the German High Command think of you. And he goes, no, you're just bringing me stuff to upset me, is Chamberlain's attitude. I'll rely on Henderson. But what's really amazing about this is this entire time, right? Yeah. MI5 officers are all really anti-appeasement. So Chamberlain distances himself from MI5 because he's hearing stuff he doesn't want to hear. I mean, we talk about the German dictators. The dictators don't
only listening to what they want to hear.
Yeah. We talk about that a lot, right? But it's going on.
It cuts both ways.
Yeah, but what's really amazing is Churchill this entire time is still on the intelligence list from MI6 from Desmond Morton, who's the former MI6 officer. So Churchill knows everything that's going on, and Chamberlain forgot that Churchill was on this list. And
that's just brilliant, isn't it?
Apparently, he was horrified when he was reminded that Churchill was still on the circulation list for Downing Street rearmament intelligence and briefings. Right? Oh, what? I didn't realise, because Churchill's able to use that politically against him, because it's about politics. For Chamberlain is playing politics,
right? Tory
party politics this entire time. It's
fascinating.
This book's great because it's a digest of this stuff. So it's not a deep history, but it's but just the sort of the web that Chamberlain wove to protect, and it's about protecting himself politically.
Yeah.
And
it just sounds absolutely incredible. Incredible.
And then when you get into what Churchill's up to in Washington, what Churchill's guys are up to in Washington in 1941, trying to bring the Americans in, is absolutely unbelievable. And you know, there's a diary of a Dutch boy. You know this?
No.
So there's a diary of a Dutch boy. Let me just pull my notes up. It's a story of a Dutch boy who, Dirk van der Heide. It's a diary of a Dutch boy. The Blitzkrieg comes and he lives in Rotterdam with his mother and father and younger sister, and the Germans invade, and his mother encourages him to keep a diary, and they make a dramatic escape to England. Forgery. New York Times bestseller list. There's William Shirer's Burning Diary that the British give a nudge. 2 of the top 10 best-selling books, and then it's the Dutch diary, Dirk van Heide's diary. It's total forgery, probably written by some British author for the the intrepid circuit, and it's to make people sympathetic.
Fantastic.
And there's a load of this history that basically hasn't really been investigated properly, like just how much propaganda there was going on in America being generated, in order to bring the Americans in. There's the map. There's the famous map, the German invasion map, but there's just so much more of that going on. And Churchill's listening to Roosevelt's conversations with Cordell Hull and Joe Kennedy. They've tapped them.
I knew that. I did know that. Yeah.
Well, there's all that, which I think is really interesting. And when Stevenson finds out, when William Stevenson finds out that the Americans are onto him and Burl's onto him, he simply tries to find dirt on them and disrupt anyone who's trying to disrupt him. Absolutely amazing.
Well, I can't wait to read it.
Anyway, that's it for today. I think we've gone around. We've
but it sort of feels like that's a subject that we should come back to. But anyway,
I think definitely, and I think I'll read this and then I'll read the books that it recommends, and I think I'll go down a bit of a.
Suddenly you'll be an expert. It'll be brilliant.
Well, no,
you know,
certainly never an expert, but a spying rabbit hole is, I think.
Yeah. No, it does sound good.
Yeah, searched. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you all so much for listening. Don't forget, tickets to We Have Ways Fest 2 are on sale, and the website is up. That's the main thing. We Have Ways. What is it? We Have Ways Fest.co.uk. We're back next Thursday when we'll be in the bowels of HMS Belfast. That was a fantastic visit.
Yeah, it wasn't.
And a reminder, of course, we do the show live every Monday night for members of our club, which is what we were talking about. Our chat with Chris Moran the other day. Yeah. If you're interested in joining, please go to patreon.com/wehaveways. Goodbye for now. Jim, you're off to Exeter now, right?
Yep, I want to see Jeremy Black. So I've got to cut away and run.
Brilliant. Okay. See you all soon. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Cheerio.